Hey everybody, today I'm going to be reviewing Paths of Glory. This film came out in 1957, was directed by Stanley Kubrick. This is an earlier film for Kubrick, and I was always surprised that this one was able to get off the ground in the way that it did, just because it didn't have a lot of interest from studios at the time, but it was more kind of the critical acclaim from The Killing, Kubrick's previous film, that was able to get him noticed, and that was also combined with a major firing at MGM, and then Kirk Douglas enters the picture. So I think it's, luck combined with knowing the right people, which is typically the story. So far as Kubrick films are concerned, I would say that this one feels a lot more straightforward in its presentation. It has a very brief runtime, it's very clean, it's very lean, and very understated, as I like to say, which in my opinion I think is the right approach for this type of film, and in particular the subject matter, because we are not focusing on war in some big epic type of way where it's going to be very ambitious and very romanticized as a cinematic experience, more in the grand tradition of the American war films. But no, this movie focuses on just a sliver, just a small aspect of the war. And to me, not always, but I do often find myself preferring those types of movies rather than the movies that do bite off more than they could chew, and it's like very much a bird's eye view type of situation. This film moves very well in terms of the pacing, and it always has a sense of tension that is coiled at the base of it. And just as a narrative, looking at the way it was written and organized and all of that, it's like, I have very few complaints about this movie. There's not a ton to criticize, and yet I must admit, even though I really do love the film, and the more that I see it, it does feel more resonant, more powerful for me. I don't know if I would rank it as one of my top favorite movies by Kubrick. And so far as how people respond to it in terms of Kubrick fans, it's kind of all over the map. Some people see it as one of his great films, and others may feel a little bit differently. In a lot of ways, I would say this is one of his more human films, if not maybe his most human film, and a lot of the scenes do depend to a degree on the emotional weight that is driving them forward, which is not something that I am used to, again, with Kubrick, and he feels, or I should say the scenes feel very present, very in the moment. And this film, I think, is emphasizing the trappings of behavior and, structure, politics, and at times it hints at, it's almost like a comedy of manners even, just a little bit. You're contrasting high society with like the brutality of what it's like on the battlefield and all that, but it's not, again, it's not quite going into that territory, not fully plunging into the more bold, satirical, maybe more irreverent depictions of war, like you might see in Dr. Strangelove. And it's certainly more literal than the more abstract, more skeletal, hypnotic nature of a movie like Full Metal Jacket, which of course covers Vietnam. And that's a film I find has grown on me with multiple viewings as well. I do find that a lot of the emotional power of this film comes from the restraint, comes from the subtlety, and I actually prefer a lot of the performances in the film that are more understated. I find them to be the most powerful. As an example, I'm really loving Kirk Douglas in this film. It's just a very reliable type of person for this type of movie, I think. And I think he's magnificent in this film. Just that iconic American actor feel that he has. He's very charismatic, obviously, and yet here, he's getting older. He's already looking very worn and seasoned as a movie veteran. And just that callous, kind of menacing face that he has, there's almost like a snarl to him, and I find it to be wonderfully compelling. He does carry the melancholy weight of this film, and he needs to, as the mediator as well as our surrogate as audience members, and yet he's never once forcing it. Yes, he is an American. There are a lot of American actors in this film, and yes, it's about the French versus the Germans, and some complain about that, the casting of it, and I don't care. I think it works absolutely fine. Kubrick is more about the experience and less about kind of, creating something literal and realistic. And you can stretch suspension of disbelief. I mean, look at Full Metal Jacket. That is a movie about Vietnam. It is shot in Europe, and you can tell. So yes, I'm not looking necessarily fully at historical accuracies so much as I am capturing a certain feeling that is timeless and universal, regardless of story or time period or place. And the plot of this film is very simple, I would say. You have a French army in World War I, and they are basically ordered by the commanding officer to basically carry out a suicide mission in the trenches to attack the Germans. They are not successful, and the officer is somehow surprised when they do not fulfill the mission, even knowing that it was very, very dangerous. And he is so angry with his army that he orders 3 random officers to be sentenced to execution. And it's mainly for the purpose of saving face, making everything appear to everybody else on the outside like everything is going as planned. And it's a very interesting and very devastating story. Because again, I don't think we see that angle as much because it's less romanticized, it's less glamorous when it comes to war. Seeing war more as it pertains to, as I said, status, symbols, and representations of powers, the lies, the cover-ups, the political inconsistencies, the special privileges that are granted to some compared to others, and how sadly so many of these similarities exist in just basically any type of industry. And I do think that it is Kubrick's more calculated, bold, yet honest approach to the material that keeps everything from feeling too hypocritical overall. From getting, it's very easy for a movie, even a movie that is a criticism of war, to get swept up in the cinematic, ecstasy of everything. I love the black and white cinematography just because, it's very easy to get swept up in color in movies, as I always say. And with black and white, it's like it strips everything away. It's like we're getting rid of distractions, but at the same time, it's like we're enhancing the drama. So I think that's really amazing. The facial features here and just the starkness of the image, it's very bleak and poetic in this particular setting. There are 3 big scenes in the movie, and they are essential, I think, to the binding of the entire story. Ties all of the repercussions and everything together when it comes to the characters. And all 3 of them, I think, are very, very, very strong. For example, in the first act, we have our first big battle scene, and it's actually the only battle scene that you're going to see in the entire film. And it's very effective and very simple in terms of the setup. Kubrick is always going for, just more like a singular tracking shot. He does not go for a lot of angles and a lot of cuts, and you notice that even with his more technical films. In this sequence, that tracking shot just really drives the momentum forward, and it's very important that we're following Kirk Douglas throughout that entire sequence because he's going to be very important throughout the rest of the movie. We need to feel his predicament. We need to understand the role that he serves in the army, and we need to be on his side as viewers because he is the one that's in a really bad position here. I also really love the big sentencing scene, particularly the cinematography of it, because I think it really captures just the immense space of the room and a lot of great angular lines and everything. It helps create that structured, rigid feeling, and the camera is very measured and very calculated as usual, but the close-ups of the faces are what's very powerful to me. It's kind of reminiscent of Passion of Joan of Arc in some way, but without maybe the raging emotion of that. Maybe it's a little bit pulled back, which is, again, preferable for this type of film. And still always, the foundation of that scene, it's built on the emotion and the fate of each individual. And then the execution scene that rounds out the third act is maybe my favorite scene in the entire film. I find it incredibly harrowing and haunting, the build-up with the drums, and I think the focus on the faces in particular, especially towards the end of the sequence, the contrast of seeing Kirk Douglas and then seeing the other officer on the other side. And perhaps the greatest use of the tracking shot in the entire film for me is in this particular sequence. But all 3 scenes use it, and that I think is a perfect way to tie it all together as well, just visually. And then there is the final scene, which is a very famous scene for the film, and I think a lot of people point to it as very effective and emotional. And yet for me, I don't like that this particular scene closes the film. I don't know, there's something about it that just doesn't quite land. And in some ways it kind of highlights maybe some of the issues that I have with the film. And like I just said, I have very little things to criticize, but just in terms of my own response to it, even though it is very subtle and I really respond to how tasteful it is in terms of depicting that kind of anti-war feeling, I just find some of the irony in it to be a little bit too pointed, a little bit too self-conscious, and I wish some of that was smoothed out a little bit more. There's just something about the writing at times, something about the politics, and like I said, the contrast between high society and, war that feels just a little bit too self-aware for my taste and just a touch on the sentimental side. And I think I just find myself more intrigued by Kubrick when he's taking the idea of war in more maybe inspired, more unique directions. Though this is a fantastic starting place for him and far beyond most filmmakers' abilities, for sure. And there's something about the final scene in the movie that kind of carries that feeling for me in certain ways, just because, I don't know, it feels just slightly disjointed from the rest of the movie. War dehumanizing the individual is such a key concept in the movie, and here you're seeing it, on display through the animalistic behavior just of people, regardless of what side you're on. It's fairly interchangeable to a degree, and yet the power of the song, void of language, void of, attachment to party or identity, culture, anything like that, somehow unites them. And here we're seeing those theatrical aspects of performance brought in a little bit, and we see echoes of that, I think, in the rest of the film. It definitely has a Fritz Lang Im type of vibe, but yet I found that to be much more climactic, more satisfying, more connected to the overall piece in terms of feeling. It's more Kirk Douglas standing outside and listening to all of them singing that is the real power to me, and I'm really glad that they let they have the movie end on that image through his perspective, again, as the mediator of sorts, and the melancholy feel of him just walking away alone like that, you know, and hearing the echoes in the distance is haunting and sad. And I am, you know, interested in what people have to say about the ending, because like I said, I know I am in the minority, so, you know, feel free to let me know how it inspires you or does not. Overall, though, I do think that this is absolutely essential viewing, especially if you are a Kubrick fan. Yeah, it's not as boastful or operatic as something like The Shining or a Clockwork Orange. It's not making a statement in the same sort of way, and yet it is still making a statement. It's a very, very strong piece, and I do think it grows over time. I've noticed it growing over time with audiences, and that's fantastic. But that is my review. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm going to plug my website as always. It is deepfocuslens.com. I'm an artist. I do commission portraits, and I sell prints of my work. If that is something that you're interested in, you can always go to the website below. If you have a question about a commission or a print, you can always email me. My email is in the description box below as well. Also, I'd like to give a shout out to my patrons who are fantastic. Guys, thank you so much for your support, and welcome to all the new members. If you're interested in supporting, the link for that is below, as well as the rest of my social media information. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.